Welcome to Clinical Perspectives, the show where we talk to people shaping MedTech to explore what it takes to build, launch, and grow in the medical device industry. I'm your host, Stephanie Stover, and today I'm joined by Susan Weidner, Chief Strategy Officer at Innovation Partners. Good morning, Susan. Lovely to have you here today.
Good morning, and glad to be a part of today's show.
So tell me about the origin story of Innovation Partners. What was the light bulb moment in building that?
So our founder, Dave Moline, has worked in the industry for many years. And during his time in working with a lot of the small, mid-sized pharmaceutical companies that specialize in oncology, it became apparent that a lot of the consulting firms that are supporting them are not focused on the needs of the small, mid-sized companies. Rather, they're more focused on the bigger pharma organizations, and often the smaller entities don't have the same staff, or they also don't have the dollars to invest in doing a lot of the upfront research to support market access, to ensure that their products come into the market on a good foot and that patients are able to access them in a convenient and affordable way.
So, what is your role as Chief Strategy Officer at Innovation Partners?
So, part of my role is to help develop and expand our capabilities to support the evolving needs of the industry clients. As a part of that, we support both biopharma as well as medical device and MedTech companies that specifically support oncology, hematology, and rare diseases. Through that, my role is to kind of bring that more holistic view of how to support them together with market access, medical affairs, and market research, so that the strategies that we support them in developing meet the current needs of their potential customer base. Along with that, that also gives me the opportunity to build out the team to support our growth in supporting our future clients, as well as being able to identify new partners that can be complementary to our services.
Okay, fantastic. How do you go about identifying new partners that you want to work with?
There are certain sets of capabilities that we have or areas that we focus on, such as clinical guideline inclusion and awareness. And often the corresponding piece might be clinical pathways. So what clinical pathways are appropriate for that particular product? And then from that, we look for partners who have those capabilities to be able to come in and synergistically work with us. So as we're building content that actually supports both guidelines and clinical pathways, it can be leveraged as a part of their partnership. So when we're looking for ones that are complementary, either in capability or services to attach to what we're doing.
Okay, fantastic. So I will dig into a little bit of what we talked about on our last call. So you mentioned that most medical device companies don't actually understand how oncology care is delivered. What are they getting wrong?
So as a medical device, they may only, as a company, support products that are in a specific part of the patient journey. So they may only recognize it, for instance, as being in the hospital setting. If it's let's say, a CT scan. We'll use that as an example of a medical device. You have to go to that facility. They are available in different sites of care, but often those companies are not directly targeting those institutions, or they may not understand that in order to be reimbursed, they need to be demonstrating to the payers the value that they add overall. So when they're coming in and actually developing products in that space, they're testing it in a limited way in order to be able to be approved by the regulatory agency. In the US, that would be the FDA, but it could be outside of the US. And then behind that, though, the impact of that product could be far reaching. So, for instance, if they're doing something in the surgical space that actually improves the surgical resection of cancer, then the long-term outcomes of doing that and doing it well actually are measured over years. And that's happening outside
Oh,
of the immediate space. So it's not that they're getting things wrong, it's that they lack the awareness of the broader implications and the ability to know and understand how that might differ between the various sites of care.
okay. So if they lack that awareness, how can they be made aware, or is that where you guys come in?
That's part of what we support them in. So we'll come in and actually help them with the patient journey. We'll also identify what information do they need in order to demonstrate the value of the product for market acceptance and access. So whether that's reimbursement, payer coverage policies, and then what are the key things that they're looking for from the product in order to be able to gain, that coverage and access. Through that, we then come in and say, okay, you may need to have a patient journey so that you can see the implication of how your product's influencing the entire pathway or the journey that the patient is on. And then here's how you would go about measuring that. So that gives them a little bit more insight in not only, where their product is going to be used, but how it then should be measured and who do they need to build relationships to in order to be able to understand and gain that research and evidence needed to support their product for the long term.
So what does that data look like practically, or is it different for every device or every company?
It could be different for every company. It has a lot to do with the disease state that they're trying to work with. So in the case of oncology, you have to think about, is it a solid tumor versus a hematologic condition that they're trying to influence? And then the next part is which intervention are they aligned to? So they could potentially be a device that's actually delivering drug, and then what kind of drug is it that they're delivering as a part of that
Mm.
process that, you know, over an extended period of time, et cetera. And then from there, you want to actually understand how to capture key data components that are related to the patient targets that you're going after. So a good example would be, what is their diagnosis? What is the stage of that diagnosis? What are some of the, comorbidities that they may have that are also, potentially conflicting with or, potentially making that measurement a little bit more difficult. And then you also have to capture, what other interventions may have been, included in the journey to go along with it. But some additional information that's extremely beneficial from a medical device or med tech perspective is also, what are the providers doing? How much time does it take them to facilitate the use of the product? How much time do they need to prep the patient to perform procedure using the product? And then afterwards, what is the aftercare or intervention time requirements? Do they have follow-ups? Is that handed off or they referred out? So through that
Hmm.
process, you need to not only have the clinical aspects, but you need the healthcare resource utilization information. And then lastly, you need to have a knowledge around the medical and pharmacy claims that go with that patient journey.
Most people think oncology happens in the hospitals. How incomplete is that picture?
It's very incomplete. Between 65 to 70% of all oncology care occurs in community practices. So yes,
Really?
and that unfortunately leaves a lot of people thinking, you know, if I have cancer, I go to an academic center, I
Hmm.
go to the hospital, but in many cases, they really can be seen locally. There are large oncology practices across the country and networks of practices that can support them with the same level of care and capability as academic and hospital outpatient facilities. Now, the one area is actually integrated delivery networks who have
Hmm.
representation of all three. So in those particular cases, they may have an academic medical center, several hospital facilities, but then also physician clinics that are working together to support patients in their geographic areas.
Okay. So where do you see manufacturers oversimplifying that system?
If they're coming at it from a newness, they often will start at the place that they're most familiar with. And through that
Right.
process, maybe not looking at or doing a deep enough research to understand what is actually the process. Where do the patients get diagnosed? There are some cancers that unfortunately people get diagnosed in the ER or inpatient because they're having an event that then translates into diagnostics that result in the identification of cancer. But then those patients may be sent or referred out to a community-based clinic. So without them
Mm,
looking for more detail about like the origin and the path around diagnosis, then they're not necessarily thinking about where those patients show up in the oncology workflow. So if you get diagnosed by your primary care, they often will refer you to another specialist, and then that specialist is the one who identifies that you have cancer. And then they refer them to an oncologist or a hematologist.
right. Okay. So you mentioned that there was a company that was strong in integrated delivery networks, but was still missing the mark. Do you remember what happened there?
So in those particular cases, they were not thinking about kind of the coordination between the different
Mm,
functions within the integrated delivery network. So they may have been purely focused on, the pharmacy aspect and not thinking about the coordination that's occurring between the clinic and the hospital outpatient. Or it could be
mhm.
that for that particular scenario, I think the company we've been talking about, they have a device that can actually be used in the clinic if they're infusing inside of the clinic, or they could be referring their patients to the hospital infusion center where that is where the device is actually being used. So that coordination
Mm.
between the two of them becomes very important. And often they may not be familiar with how that network is actually functioning or delivering certain parts of their care. So being able to go in and really understand the customers, how they're utilizing the products, how they're delivering it, and what staff is being used to deliver it is really key to understanding how they're going to be reimbursed and how the current insurance coverage may impact, how they are being paid and the amount of out of pocket for the patient.
So what actually happens then when a company gets that wrong?
Often what happens is that they miss opportunities or there's a level of frustration that occurs. And if you don't have the right support source resources for them, uh, and I think a lot of the medical device space, they're very used to what you need in kind of that academic hospital engagement. But as you start to work
Mhm.
across into the community oncology space, you need to have similar resources to what's provided with drugs. So being able to provide them with resources that explain how to code, how that coding gets reimbursed, what the current Medicare reimbursement looks like. And then the other patient resources, such as patient assistance and copay coverage, come into play as well. Many of them, are very used to using hub services or other programs to assist them in making sure that the patient, has the right support financially, but also clinically as a part of their implementation.
Um, are there cases where a product is completely unusable in certain care settings because the company hasn't thought that process all the way through?
So we can look at things associated with radiopharmaceutical delivery. Not all of the various community organizations have access to the appropriate preparation. And there, in turn, if you're a
Hmm.
device that's actually delivering that, they wouldn't have access to the device either. But yet, you would also hope that they would start thinking about how can that be implemented in a centralized way to be able to support both the larger practices, but also the small community practices as well.
Okay. How do stakeholders change across these care settings?
Well, that is another one where they have some commonality as far as the intent, but who participates in them is slightly different. So, from
Hmm.
a drug perspective, we all know that the P&T committees drive a lot of the decision making in the academic and hospital institutions. The community has now also developed committees that allow them, the bigger that they get, to make similar decisions. And that includes the use of the devices. So through that
Hmm.
process, you have to come in and present what your product does, the value it brings, the targeted patient population, and then the economic implications of that from an overarching decision maker. The difference is who's making those decisions in those sites of care. So in an academic hospital outpatient perspective, a lot of that is driven by pharmacy, and they'll bring in experts
Hmm.
from the various clinical areas to give feedback or input. If it's a technology, then you actually have a different committee who's looking at the larger technical component for the delivery of care. When you move to the community setting, it's normally the practice leadership. So it could be the CEO or medical director in combination with the pharmacy director and quality director who actually evaluate and review to make those determinations.
So that sounds like a very long process for manufacturers to get their technology into those settings.
Mhm.
What is the typical, I guess, sales cycle for manufacturers?
Really, they need to start the communication process 12 to 18 months ahead of their approval timeframe. And then behind that, they need to really have good interactions with payers to know and help them understand, what's coming, when's it coming, how much of their membership is going to be impacted or potentially um, have this product available to them. And then, over the next, 18 to 24 months behind that to be communicating, the experience and the evidence that's being generated to continue to ensure that it's covered and accessible to patients.
Is So if it's, in that pre-approval stage, how does marketing play into that?
So, marketing works very closely with the market access organizations or functions within the companies to ensure that there's consistency in the message about the products.
Hmm.
What is the real features and benefits of the product, but then translating that into a value proposition from a payer perspective. So you have to be
Mhm.
able to take those key components and then articulate them in a more simplistic way, but be very robust. A lot of the decision makers within the payer are not necessarily familiar with oncology or the products within oncology. So you have to help them understand where does the product fit within that patient journey? How long does the associated cost for providing that care occur? And then what is the associated benefits, both financially and clinically, both in the short term, so let's say 12 months, to longer term, say 3 to 5 years, because there's a
Mhm.
significant amount of turnover in the payer space. So people change their insurance plans fairly regularly, as
Yeah.
much if you have cancer because you're already in a cycle and you're focused on what needs to be there next. But sometimes that change can occur because your employer's insurance has changed. So sometimes it's not a function of their choice as much as it is influenced outside of it.
With the stakeholders and the FDA approval, marketing-wise, what are you able to do or say pre-approval versus post-approval?
So there's actually guidelines or regulations that need to be followed with FDAMA 114 about pre-approval marketing messages. You can, at that high level decision maker level, for both healthcare organizations as well as payers, provide them the clinical components and rudimentary economic information to assist them in their decision-making process so that you can prepare for that product coming in. Where does it fit in the formulary process? Where does it fit in the medical policy or pharmacy benefit coverage? And then through that process, you can follow up afterwards. Often you have a pre-approval dossier, either a drug or a technology dossier that can be provided that provides more detail for their committees to use as a part of their decision-making process.
So now, if they're in pre-approval, how are they being typically funded? Both the product and or the
Yeah,
activities?
so prior to product, if this is their first product, then they have investment that they get from a wide variety of investors, including private equity, et cetera, that then gives them the money to be able to do the work necessary to bring the product through the clinical trial phase, get that in front of the regulatory agencies, and then uh, start to work on the commercialization activities needed to bring it into the market. If it's in a company that already has several products, then often part of the money that they're making commercially on the existing products is actually used to fund the ongoing research and development. And then they estimate how much money is needed to support that pre-launch set of activities to ensure that all the right evidence and activities or steps and content, including education for providers, et cetera, are being put forward in alignment with the timing for launch.
Okay, that makes sense. So now going back to what you were saying about the gap in the oncology system and what manufacturers know about that. If a manufacturer actually wanted to fix this within their own company, their own awareness, their own strategy to reach out to the different areas in the system, where should they start?
So the first thing that they would want to do is one, educate within. Often one of the challenges is that if you're a smaller manufacturer, you also have a smaller team of people. That team is not necessarily of the same, each individual does not have the same level of knowledge or understanding. So you want to do your internal training that can be supported by us or others to help them know and understand like the activities that are needed, why they're needed, the importance of them. So a good example would be in the oncology space. A lot of people don't understand, um, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network guidelines,
Mm,
how they influence the decision-making process, how that's supported through medical, how it's a part of the medical policy coverage from a payer perspective. And then, as you're doing that education and you're working with them, then you want to come in and actually create an influence map of who are the most influential groups to be working with early, either through clinical trials because they have their own research networks, or also being able to help with thinking through the placement in a formulary or guideline decision making process, including how it influences their clinical pathways. So when we map that in, they can be assured, at a certain target, like they want to touch, the top 40% or they want to touch the top 50%, then you can help them know and understand where are the best places to be doing that. And then introduce them to allow them the opportunity to create a relationship, create awareness, and then they can start to participate in meetings that those individuals are attending, either through their own organizations or other organizations such as group purchasing organizations.
okay. If there's one thing that you wish every oncology device company understood, what would that be?
The patient journey.
Mm,
They need to really understand how their product impacts the patient journey for the targeted patient population of interest. Many times they see a very small snippet of that journey and they try to solve that one problem, but they're not looking at the entire journey and being able to understand the value that they're bringing to the patient. overall.
Do you, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this, do you have a mapped out customer journey that's available maybe in PDF or something like that that you would be able to send out to our listeners?
Well, it has to be customized to the disease state. And then, as a part of that, it wouldn't be fair because you might miss some important components if we tried to simplify it. Rather, we want to get to know the product, and then we can come in and create one that's customized to them fairly quickly.
Okay, that makes sense. Fair enough. How much revenue is this blind spot actually costing medical device companies, would you say, on average?
That would be really difficult to estimate, but I would say probably at least, 25 to 40% on the upfront, because when you're not familiar with process, then as part of it, they underestimate or overestimate the adoption rate. They don't necessarily know how to remove the barriers. So that means that your adoption slows on the front end. And through that process, that's lost opportunity. And often the quicker that you can get providers to start utilizing the product, then the more likely you are to come into the market. Once you have that experience, you build a relationship with them. When you bring another product, the uptake time will be faster. So, we have some medical device companies, for instance, who they had to develop an entirely different business model in order to come into the market. It wasn't covered by insurance. It was a need, often paid for instance, by the patient out of pocket. But, that could take, 5 to 8 years before they actually get through the process to have permanent CPT codes that can be reimbursed by Medicare and the commercial payers consistently, as opposed to a second product coming in the same space, especially if it's a larger patient population. It gives them the opportunity to leverage their learnings and to rethink how they're bringing it into the market, when that they're engaging, how to engage, and create awareness, especially with the payers. A lot of times they're not familiar with the area that you're trying to address, and they don't know how big the problem is. They may look at it and say, it's just generic drugs, but they're not thinking about all the specialists, the physical therapy, the hospitalizations and ER visits that are actually being generated as a result of that patient having that condition. And they're in turn, bringing that forward.
So do you think most manufacturers are overconfident in their understanding of oncology and the oncology system?
I don't know that it's overconfident as it is unaware. They're confident in their
So it's more,
ability to use the information that they have, but it's more of a lack of awareness. And they're in turn, they come in with, this is how it's going to work. And then when it doesn't, they're just not prepared to deal with it.
so it's more of a knowledge problem rather than a strategy problem.
Yes. And the knowledge has to feed the strategy.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense. So where can people follow you or get in touch?
They can always contact us at innovationpartners.org. You can put in a request, or they can also reach us on LinkedIn. We have both a page, and I also have a profile there, so they can always reach out to me directly.
Fantastic. Any last piece of advice or message you want to leave listeners with?
Just that there are people who have a great amount of knowledge to share, and that can really help inform their strategies for bringing these new products into the market. I think medical device will become a key component of oncology care over the next 5 to 10 years and can have a dramatic impact on patient lives.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can find Susan at innovationpartners.org or on LinkedIn. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next episode.